Hi, everyone. Welcome to P&P Live. My name is Michelle, and I'm a bookseller with the Children and Teens Department. Thank you for joining us tonight in this newer format where we can continue to bring you politics and prose author events, but from the comfort of your own home. Please bear with us as we work out any kinks and become even more comfortable with this new platform. At any time during the event, you can click on the green Buy the Book button to get your own copy of The Degenerates. We'll order it for you and ship it to your home. As you know, small businesses and independent bookstores are getting hit hard right now, but we're so thankful for loyal customers like you for keeping both our business and our spirits afloat. Tonight, you can ask the author a question by clicking Ask a Question, located at the bottom of your screen. You can also vote on your favorite questions. And at the end, we'll have time to go over some together. As always, please remember this is a creative, safe space, and we ask that folks be respectful of one another and any questions or comments. Also, do not worry about turning off your webcam or your mic for our event. You can see us, but we cannot see you. So feel empowered to stay in comfy clothes and enjoy. Now on to tonight's event. It is my pleasure to introduce J. Albert Mann, our author, who is joined in conversation with Mary Quattlebaum. Jen has written several novels, including What Every Girl Should Know, in addition to short stories and poems, which were featured in Highlights for Children. There she won the Highlights Fiction Award and the Highlights Editor's Choice Award. She has a Master's of Fine Arts from the Vermont College of Fine Arts in Writing for Children and Young Adults, and her historical fiction drops readers back in time as she vividly paints character struggles and aspirations. In her newest release, The Degenerates, we learn about four young women determined to survive the Massachusetts School for the Feeble-Minded. With raw detail, we see the girls' daily lives up close and the grit and spirit needed to rise above. Jen is joined in conversation tonight with Mary Quattlebaum, who is a children's author, a Washington Post book reviewer, and a friend of our Children and Teen Department. Mary and Jen met at the Vermont College of Fine Arts, and Mary continues to teach there as a faculty member. And with that, I'll turn the conversation over to Jen and Mary. Thank you all.
Oh, thank you so much, Michelle. What a lovely introduction. And thank you so much to Politics and Prose for hosting us tonight and for all that they're doing during the pandemic for the book community. And we also appreciate all the people who have tuned in tonight, and we look forward to your questions later on. Jen, I can tell you it is delightful to see you. And I remember last year we met face to face for one of these conversations at Politics and Prose. You were talking about your wonderful novel, What Every Girl Should Know. And at that time, you kind of whet our appetite. You told us a little bit about the work you were doing for the Degenerates. So, yes. And I see that we are sort of in solidarity with our accessories tonight.
Yes.
You are wearing a green ribbon, as am I, in support of mental health awareness. And we're also both wearing Jailed for Freedom women's suffrage pins. And I know because we had talked about this, that we really wanted to talk about the themes for Women's History Month in March and the theme for May's Mental Health Awareness Month and how the Degenerates ties in with those. Can you chat a little bit about that?
Sure. So the Degenerates is about thank you to Michelle for that nice introduction and introducing the book, and thanks for Politics and Prose for hosting us, of course, and thanks Mary for doing this with me tonight. So the Degenerates is about four young women who have been institutionalized for life at the Massachusetts School for the Feeble-Minded. It takes place in 1928 at the height of the eugenics movement. And maybe I'll just say a few words about the eugenics movement. Today we call it a movement, but at one point it was hard science. And eugenics is, or was, it was kind of like dog breeding only for people. So it was a science about improving human development and eradicating disease and vice through manipulation of human procreation. So it was basically saying, if we get the right people together, who have the desirable traits, that humans will just get better and better. So it was a science that was come upon by a man named Sir Francis Galton, and it came out of his cousin was Charles Darwin, and Charles Darwin came up with his theory of evolution, and he got his cousin Sir Galton really jealous, because Sir Galton was also a scientist and he didn't have anything good going on. And so he kind of took the natural selection of his cousin and, nixed the natural and just went with the selection. And so eugenics is selecting basically the right people to procreate, to get the right kind of human. And of course, desirable traits is a very slippery slope, because what is desirable? And what ends up happening, of course, at the beginning of the 20th century is eugenics takes off in our community, and who's desirable and who's not. And of course, many disabled folks across America, hundreds of thousands of them, in fact, were institutionalized to sort of quarantine them away from the rest of the for the non-disabled folks, so that they could not procreate. And that is what eugenics is. And these 4 young women end up at the school for different reasons, and all of them against their will. And so that's how it kind of bridges mental health and Women's History Month. So men and women were institutionalized, but women were institutionalized at a much higher rate, for the simple reason that they were institutionalized because, for all the reasons, if they were disabled, but also the LGBT community was also institutionalized, and women who were pregnant out of wedlock, these people who are LGBT or women who were pregnant out of wedlock, they were considered what was called a moral moron. And so they were also institutionalized. And even women who showed a real interest in sex, they were also institutionalized. So you can imagine that's a lot of women. So.
Yeah, thank you so much, Jen. That is just fascinating. And it's also a big part of our history that's been disappeared. I feel like you've done a great service to the children's book community by writing this novel and by bringing out this topic. You told us last year that as you were working on What Every Girl Should Know, you got the idea to write the novel, The Degenerates. Can you talk a little bit about your aha moment for that? Like, as you were researching your book about Margaret Sanger, you had this moment when you realized, I know what my next novel is going to be. Can you tell us, how you came to that?
Sure. So Margaret Sanger is the mother of birth control, and of course, birth control and eugenics are linked, and they also were happening at the same time at the beginning of the 20th century. And so I had to research a lot about eugenics because I was researching Margaret Sanger. So you couldn't get out of that. Mm-hmm. And of course, I don't want to ever get out of anything when it comes to research. So, and eugenics is just a fascinating subject. It's a huge subject. Eugenics, it's a massive subject. And so as I was reading about eugenics and reading about the schools, and you can't help, everything becomes a little personal. And for me, it became personal because I was born with a spinal disorder that created large body difference. It's harder to tell now because I've been through a series of very long surgeries. But before those surgeries, I had extreme body difference. And so I would have been one of the people who would have been rounded up as having, physical difference and, wanting my genes out of the gene pool safely away from the non-disabled population. So as I was reading this, it was hard not to imagine myself inside of one of these institutions.
Yeah. So that personal connection must have just been a very powerful motivator for you as you powered through all the research you did. So tell us about the research you did, because I know that the Degenerates is just really grounded in so much research.
Well, I love to research, and I just have a lot of fun with it. And the way I do it is in this circle way, where I start with about 5 of what I believe are the main sources, and I just start reading those sources, and I take their bibliographies, and I get all of those books, and I read those books, and then keep reading everyone's bibliography. I also always reach out to the authors of the books that I feel are the seminal works in any subject that I'm doing. So with eugenics, I reached out to those people and asked them, what should I be reading? And so this circle keeps going, and I keep reading until when I'm reading a book and I get to the bibliography and I go through the bibliography and I've read it all. So then I know I've completed the circle. And with the Degenerates, it was really great because it takes place in Boston. The Massachusetts School for Feeble-Minded began in South Boston, and was moved about 8 miles outside of Boston at one point. So I was researching in my own hometown, which is just a fantastic way to research. And the Brandeis University houses the Samuel Gridley Howe Library, which has all of these documents from all the writings of the doctors and nurses, and they took copious notes. And so you can go, if you look in my bibliography, actually, you can just go through, I give some of the websites, you can go right to what's electronically on the archive and read some of this. But I could share a little bit, Mary, of some of this.
Share a little bit.
Okay. Thanks. Okay, so I'm just going to read out of one of the medical pamphlets, and trust me, there's hundreds of them to read. And this one was called The Mind Unveiled. And I'm going to read just a little piece out of chapter 1. And chapter 1 is entitled Our Household Pets. And just so you know, they're unfortunately not talking about dogs and cats. But insanity, blindness, deafness, idiocy, and all the catalog of diseases, physical and mental, have their sources in the same fact: a departure from the laws of nature. We cannot build a sound and seaworthy ship out of ill-seasoned or knotty timber, nor yet drive a ship that is sound and seaworthy successfully across the ocean with tattered sails or stupid pilot. So this is how some of these, they kind of wax poetic in this horrifying fashion. But it's just such a, that piece, of course, so many of them stand out. But I just love the knotty timber because I feel like I was born with structural scoliosis. So I feel a little like that knotty timber. Like I am a piece of knotty timber. And so, you just become so personal. But you always think to yourself, like if you're walking down a beach and you're looking for driftwood, though, like, you're looking for that knotty timber. You're looking for that like beautiful piece of twisted driftwood. You're not looking for like a Home Depot 2x4 plank, it's just like, it's amazing that they were so, that they just missed the mark.
Yeah.
So anyway, I had a lot of fun with the research, and I really enjoyed myself.
Yes, I can tell you do. Even talking about it, you just glow, Jen. Your characters. So the book revolves around 4 girl characters: London, Maxine, Rose, and Alice. And I was just enthralled by them. Like from the first page, I was so engaged in their story. And you brought them to life on the page so vividly. So tell us a little bit about your genesis for those characters. Like, are they based on real people that you came across in your research, or composites?
They are. They're all based on people that I found within the documents. And these documents, I mean, they're just a bunch of data. And so these doctors and nurses just, just just stared at these, the people in the institutions and took down, their of course, their height and their weight, but they wrote down everything they ate, and the amounts. They wrote down, like, head circumference was huge. Everybody had to have their head measured again and again. And so there was all this data about these people, but nobody put anything, like, there was nothing actually about them. Just reams and reams of data. So I was, I would read through all of this, but every once in a while, and again, I'm going to grab my notes because I wrote some of it down, but every once in a while, there were these, like, little things that would just crop up that were written that I found that was like, there they are, like, there's the person. And of course, they always wrote them down strangely negative, but I couldn't help it, and that these were the people I would focus on. So, and if you've read the book, if anyone out there has read the book, you might hear some, like, who is who in this. But one little tidbit I came across was, she has an unnatural fascination with insects. And I just thought, why does it have to be unnatural? Like, she has an unnatural fascination with insects. And, like, insects, like, I don't really like them that much, but they are fascinating. And, like, when Darwin, he had a fascination with his hummingbirds or his finches, and nobody said he has an unnatural fascination with those hummingbirds, So anyway, another one was, she likes solitude and chooses it over the company of others. And I thought, this is somebody in an institution who's sleeping 2 inches from her neighbor, and who is actually being taken to the bathroom to use the bathroom as a group 3 times a day. Like, this is someone who never gets to be alone, and yet somehow that's looked on negatively. This one I like. She sings with a clear, mellow voice that astonishes us, though these performances seem always for her own private benefit. And I think, again, so what? She sings beautifully, and she just is doing it for herself. And this is one that, if you read the book, you'll know who it is. She has an affinity to particular sticks and stones, and she carries a single stick with her for long periods of time, as if it were a baby doll. And so I did, this is my character Rose. And of course, they weren't allowed to have toys. And so, this is what she found to love. And I actually kind of like sticks and stones as well. I think they're really interesting.
Yeah.
And the last one is where I got my character London from. And I found this in the documents. For some reason, she often tips the elbow of tea drinkers, so they'll spill it in their laps. And I just love that one because I'd like it. And then they went on to say, like, that they couldn't break her of this habit, and that it would go away for a while, and then they would kind of forget, and there she would, and just tip their elbow again and let them spill their tea. And I just thought, yes, like, you have no control of your life, none. And so if this is the control you have, to just tip somebody's elbow now and then and watch their tea spill, like, good for them, Anyway.
So subversive.
Yes. So yeah, I took all 4 of the girls and the rest of the characters all directly from the documents, and even I even took the words, like, everything that's said about the girls in the book by a doctor or a nurse, except like hello or goodbye or something like that. But like but everything that's said about them is directly from the documents. I actually did quotes. So yeah.
Wow. You brought the institution itself to life. Like, you mentioned how constraining it was for these characters. They literally were sleeping, practically side by side. They had to go to the bathroom at certain times and only at those times. And they would be punished if they tried to go to the bathroom at a different time.
Yeah.
So as you were reading that, or, finding out that kind of research, it's hard at this point in time to believe that people could be treated like that. But when you first came upon those details, how did you feel about that, or how did you react to that?
It's always surprising and shocking, although in the times we live in now, like, it's hard to be shocked and surprised at what we will do to others. Mm-hmm. And so yes, when you read about institutional life, it was shocking, and it was upsetting. There's a great book called Christmas in Purgatory, and it's where in the 60s, because I mean, my book takes place in 1928, but things didn't get better for a long time. So in 1965, the journalists went undercover and produced a book called Christmas in Purgatory, and it was just photographs of the inside of these institutions, and things were pretty bad. I mean, we have this ribbon, this nice ribbon for mental health, but there's another symbol for mental health, and that are that of chains. And it's because we took people who had mental disorders, and we chained them, to walls for many, many, many years. So it was very difficult to read about institutional life.
It's the power of a strong historical novel like yours, Jen, that it not only illuminates a certain point in time, a time that we've often forgotten about or we remember selectively. So it illuminates the past, but it also illuminates the present, because of course certain conditions, as you've pointed out, are parallel to that treatment today. It's a cautionary tale for the future in many ways too. So.
It is true, and I always think to myself, like, it's so easy to look back at a book like The Degenerates and say, okay, how ridiculous it is to call people morons and idiots, and these were medical terms, morons and idiots, and the school was actually called the Massachusetts Hospital for Idiotic and Feeble-Minded Youth, and then it was kind of long, so they cut out the idiotic after like 20 years or something. But it's very easy to look at these terms and say, oh my gosh, like how ridiculous it is that we did this. But I like to say, okay, if you want to do that, because we've got a little time between us, but now look around us today. Look around ourselves today and say, what today are we doing that, 20 years from now, 30 years from now, they're going to say, oh my gosh, how did they not know that was ridiculous? And there are things around us right now, that we believe are A-okay, and that are not.
Yes. So this is a question that is related to craft. So What Every Girl Should Know was written in the first person. And of course, it had a very strong, Margaret Sanger type voice to it. You really set yourself a challenge with The Degenerates, where you tell the story from the perspective of 4 different characters, very different from one another, of course. So, how did you sort of handle that? What were the challenges that you bumped up against? Anything that was especially intriguing that you'd like to share with us?
Well, I mostly write from first person. I like it, but I went with 4. Let's put it this way: I went with 4 points of view. The first reason I did it was because when I was looking for that main character, I thought there were so many voices that have been silenced because of eugenics, and that all these hundreds of thousands of people who were incarcerated for their entire lives against their wills, they were all silenced, and all we have left is like their fascination with insects, or we have these little tiny things about them, and their head circumferences. They didn't give us nothing from all these people. They were just silenced. And in fact, in all of my research, I only found one account, and it was an older gentleman who was looking back on his time in the institution. He actually got out and looking back on it. So in the time period that I was looking at these institutions, they had no voice. And so I thought, I can't choose one main character. I need to show more of an experience. And so that is why I went with 4 instead of 1. 4 is what I thought I could handle. Yeah, because it is challenging to do different voices because you really want to make them sound different. And the reason I went with third person instead of first person is because when I'm writing a book, I kind of look at like the characters have an interior arc, and then there's the exterior arc. And if I'm writing a story that's got a really strong interior arc, I really feel like for me as a writer, that lends itself to first person. But if the story has a really, really strong exterior arc, or it competes with the interior arc, then I feel like third person is a little better, at least for me as a writer. I like that third person. I like that little bit of distance because I wanted to make sure to get institutional life in. I wanted to get this cultural and social, political moment. And it wasn't just the interior lives of the characters, but also that. And so I needed third person to just back away from that a tiny bit. So those were my choices. And to capture those voices, I really will just say I did a ton of side writing. So I just wrote about those characters. I invented, like, I knew where they were from the documents, but I built their homes in my mind, and I drew pictures of them, and I just knew. So if they were home, if they were thinking about home, I knew exactly what that home looked like. And the more side writing that I did, the more when I actually started writing the story, it was their voices I heard, instead of like a mixture, or, the last thing I wanted was, when you have multiple points of view, I didn't want readers to have to be turning back. Who am I reading? I wanted them to know.
Yeah. And all the work that you did to sort of get a sense in your own mind of these characters' backstory really shines through on the page, because we learn a little bit about their families and what brought them to the institution, and also, their hopes that they might be reunited with their families at some point.
Yes.
And Jen, this has all been so interesting, and I could ask you a million more questions. But we also have a number of eager people who have questions for you. Before we segue to the Q&A, I'm wondering if you could read us a little bit from the Degenerates, so that we can hear the sound of the writing in our own ear.
Oh, thanks, Mary. So I will do that. So here it is, the Degenerates, and I'll just give a quick shout out to Rebecca Syracuse, who designed this gorgeous cover, and then also to Sarah Maxwell, who drew these beautiful girls. So I'll read from chapter 1, but I'm not going to start right on page 1, but you don't need to know anything. So I'll just start. Run! The old lady growled before she was knocked from her chair by an angry silver-haired cop looming over her. London was so startled by the strange scene that she didn't do anything in that first moment, but watched the old woman's head hit the window frame. That was a mistake. London's hands were violently secured together, and she was shoved against the metal frame of the old woman's bed, where she tumbled to the floor and then lay desperately trying to catch her breath. She could hear the old lady shouting at the men. How many, London couldn't tell. All she could see were boots surrounding the woman's ratty slippers. London struggled to make sense of what was happening. What had she done? What had the missus done? Besides the old lady's hooch, London couldn't think of nothing. Why would a crowd of bulls be interested in a couple of bottles of illegal whiskey? The cops dragged the missus from the floor and tossed her back into her chair. London's head cleared. She could now see there were 3 cops, making 5 of them inside the small room, and they seemed to be talking about her. The entire scene was beyond anything London could understand. No one had ever taken any notice of her in her life, except for Albie, and that hadn't turned out so well. I told you what would happen if you didn't cooperate, you hag, the silver-haired cop shouted into the old lady's face. She responded by spitting into his. London closed her eyes so she wouldn't see it, but she sure as hell heard it as the woman's head struck the window frame again. London stumbled to her feet toward the missus, but one of the badges grabbed a fistful of her hair and dragged her towards the door. London kicked and bit, fighting mightily to keep herself inside the room, but the cop was a genuine baby grand, and with his fists locked in her hair, her body followed her head, her boots scraping across the floor. The cop stopped abruptly in the doorway, and London, hanging from his hand, finally caught her first solid glimpse of the old lady. Her face was bloodied, Her gray hair was a tangled mess, and her dress's collar was ripped off one of her shoulders, but her eyes shone more brightly than the electric street lamps in Scully Square. "This Dago bitch is a moron," barked the cop, holding London by the head and shaking her in response to his words. "Piss out your ass," London cried. London could hear the old lady's crackling laughter over the crack of her own skull against the doorframe, making the pain more than worth it. "Not only are you a moron," the cop said, turning London's head to face him, "but you're also a knocked-up little slut." His words struck her harder than her head had hit the doorframe. Hearing it like this, out in the open, pregnant. Yes, she was pregnant. How this man could possibly know or care, London didn't have time to ponder. She went limp with confusion as the man jerked her out the door. The last thing she saw was the old woman's fists striking out at the gray-haired cop.
Wow, Jen. You just bring us into the story immediately and into London's situation. And I've already read the book. But if I hadn't, I would want to keep on reading after hearing you read it. Well, now we're going to segue to the Q&A. And Michelle, you're going to explain a little bit about how that will be handled.
So far, and I know it will continue to be, it was really neat to hear about the detail that led to creating the characters, and great to hear a portion of the book as well. So yes, now it's time for our audience Q&A. Don't worry, if you haven't already asked a question, you still can do so. So what you want to do is click on the Ask a Question feature at the bottom of your screen and type in your questions there. You can also click there to vote on your favorite questions, and that'll move them to the top of the list. And now we'll have time to go over some with Jen. So Mary, I will turn it back over to you. Thank you.
And Mary, can I cut you off right before you start asking the questions? I just want to quick say to everyone in the audience that the sun is going down here in Boston, and I live on a boat. And my boat is very close to the USS Constitution, which is, you probably all know as Old Ironsides. So you may hear in the next 5 to 10 minutes a very large cannon shot, because every evening the US Navy, and every morning at 8 a.m. and every evening at sundown, they set off the cannon. So just wanted, everyone, if they hear that, all is well.
Thank you so much, Jen. So here is a question, comes from Taylor. What are your favorite aspects of writing historical fiction?
Oh, such a nice, easy question. Thank you, Taylor. It's research. I love research. I just enjoy learning. I enjoy finding out everything I can about a single subject. I enjoy meeting the people who are really into a certain subject. So I enjoy the historians too. I like how people just say, I love this aspect of history, or I love this bit of science, or whatever. I'm going to learn everything. I'm going to dedicate my whole life to it. So I don't dedicate my whole life to a single subject, but in researching, I get to meet all those people who do, and they're always so interesting.
Oh, thank you, Jen. And here is a question from Leah. What message do you hope readers will take away from the Degenerates?
That's such a good question. This is what I hope, is that sometimes I hear a lot of complaining about people having to be politically correct. And I really kind of love having to be politically correct. I think it's a good thing, because it makes us all think before we speak or before we write. And it makes us think to ourselves, should I say this? Should I? And if you're thinking those things, like there's just this beat of a moment where you're self-censoring. And I love that self-censoring. And I think when you read a book like Degenerates, what I'm hoping is what I talked a little bit about before, which is there was a time period where saying someone was a moron or an idiot really meant something quite horrible, which was that they were institutionalized for life. And so I would love us all, after you read that book, to kind of like to think of yourself and think of like again, what are my thoughts now that are going to seem so ridiculous in the future, and that possibly thinking in a politically correct way is a way for us to learn.
Yeah, thank you.
Did I answer that all right? That's what I hope that we take away from the Degenerates, you know.
And here is a question from Heidi, and you will love this question.
Okay.
In the Degenerates, which characters do you relate to the most?
Well, I think I relate to all of them, but probably London the most. And maybe because she was the most fun to write for me. And there is a little bit of a story behind London. And that is that I had written London. She was a character of mine in another book called First Day, and it was a middle grade novel, and it was a retelling of Charles Dickens's A Christmas Carol, because I'm a huge fan of that book. And so I wrote this, and London was Scrooge, and she didn't want to go to the first day of school. And so London was so awful. She was a great Scrooge. Anyway, I sent it to my agent, and my agent was like, ugh, no way. Like, London is awful. No, we can't sell this book. So anyway, I was sad. And so I had to put, you know, London away. And they sometimes say like, oh, you have to kill your darlings. But I don't think you have to kill them. Like, I think you can just like tie them up and gag them and stick them in the closet. You know, and then you can like pull them out later. And so that's what I did with London. Was when I read about the tea drinker, you know, the tea tipper of the elbow, and I thought, oh my gosh, like, London lives. And so I literally lifted London from my book and plopped her down in the Degenerates, and then I had to surround her with a whole backstory, because of course she is a little Italian girl, from southern Italy. And she comes over with her parents during the Spanish flu, which she becomes an orphan because the flu takes her parents. And so I had to explain why a little girl who should be like Philomena is London, and I do. So anyway, yes, I enjoyed writing London the best, and I definitely relate to her the best. Thank you for that question.
I just have to say, I love that theory of not killing your darlings, but instead just tying them up and gagging them.
Yeah.
And looking for opportunities to bring them back again, because London was such an engaging character that it feels like the world would be lost without her. So I'm glad she's out there in the children's book world. Yeah, we unbagged her and brought her back. And Jen, here is a question from Carolyn, and you spoke about this a little bit, your own personal connection to the disabled community. And I was wondering if you wanted to elaborate on that a little more.
Sure. I mean, it's hard not to, as writers, we to say it's not personal. There's always something personal. Otherwise, maybe you wouldn't want to stick with a subject as long as you do, or sticking with a book, of like historical fiction can be, between 1 and 2 years for me, almost 2 years. So, you really have to have some personal, something personal at stake. And for me, this was just imagining myself, being put away in an institution because of my physical difference, and just the just the subject of like what bodies matter in the world and what bodies don't matter. Mm-hmm. And so I saw all these children and adults, their bodies didn't matter, and so for me, like, I grew up. And that was one of my battles always, was, that my body didn't matter because it wasn't a right body. Mm-hmm. And so I definitely had that same connection.
Yeah, and you and I have talked a little bit about this in the past too, but how much this intersects with gender and class and socioeconomic status. Like, a lot of the girls that were put away were poor, or they were orphans, and there basically wasn't any way to take care of them. And so I appreciated that you really explored those avenues as well in the book.
Mm-hmm. Yes, absolutely. It was the marginalized, the same groups that are marginalized today were marginalized then. And those are the groups who were hit hardest by eugenics.
Mm-hmm. So in light of COVID-19, have you thought about writing a novel on a historic pandemic? And that question comes from Margaret.
No. I mean, there's some great books out there already, like on, the flu that swept through in the early 20th century, which is what took London's parents, what they died of. So there's some wonderful, especially some wonderful children's books on that subject. But no, I think there's going to be a lot of people writing about this pandemic. And I don't think I'll be one of them.
Here is a question from Miriam, who says, I love the story. What a page turner. So already you have somebody who has read the book and has a question they want to ask. So Miriam is wondering about eugenics, and you've touched on that previously, but would you like to elaborate on your comments? Tell us a little bit more about eugenics. I know you wrote about eugenics, as you pointed out, for What Every Girl Should Know, and of course for the Degenerates. Is it a thread that you might come back to at another point in another novel?
I might, but I might look into the future a little bit with it. Eugenics. If anyone doesn't know the history of it, so eugenics kind of all of it died like a very quick death because a man named Hitler sent his people over to the United States to study our eugenic programs here and got some really good information that he then took back to Germany and used to murder 6 million people. So he used, and that's where eugenics, that was the high point for eugenics. So basically he took desirable traits and he just took it even further. And so the first people that he did murder were the disabled people. And then afterwards he went on, as we know, to the Jewish community. So eugenics has this like kind of like it blows up, right? And so now it becomes a little bit of a dirty word. And if you follow the line of eugenics, it doesn't go away. It kind of goes underground a little bit during World War II, and it crops back up again as family values. And so it continues on, and the same men, and I will say men because it was all men, it was the same men who cropped up on the other side in the late 40s, 50s, and 60s and on, and they became family values. So it is still around today, eugenics. We just don't use
that is so fascinating. Thank you for tracing that thread, and also showing us how euphemistically we couch these terms.
Yes.
And of course, how these programs are often still with us, but they're labeled differently. So,
yes.
Yeah, good to keep in mind.
Mm-hmm.
Here is a lovely compliment, and then I'll read another question. So Debbie says, this is not a question, but I want to say this is such a great, interesting, illuminating conversation.
Oh,
thank you, Debbie.
Thank you, Debbie.
And we have a question from Honora. When were you first inspired to write? So like looking at your childhood, Jen, or teenage years, perhaps?
Yeah, it was later in life. Like I didn't take the same kind of route that I sometimes hear other writers take. So I wasn't a kid with a book in my hand all the time, and I wasn't chasing anyone down when I was a kid, taking notes on them. I wasn't a writer. In fact, I was more STEM going through school. I have a BS in economics. I didn't start to write until I think it was like, I was 33 or 34, and I was telling a story to my daughter and my niece, and it was about a pig who wouldn't stop cleaning, couldn't stop cleaning, and because I wanted them to clean, it didn't get them to clean, by the way. But I remember my friend saying to me, "Oh gosh, you should write that down. You should," and I was like, okay. And so I did. I wrote this story. It was called The Cleanest Pig. And I sent it away to Highlights, and they bought it. And I was just like, what? Like, I don't know how much I made, like, $50 or whatever. I was just amazed that I could make something up. And then when the art came, that was like fascinating to me, that I made up this little pig who couldn't stop cleaning, and that some artist took me serious enough that she drew all of the animals in the barn who were like highly annoyed with the cleaning pig. And it was the most wonderful experience. And so that's when I started writing. That wonderful feeling I got. I just wanted to recreate it. It's fun to create things.
And also, you inspired your children to clean.
I did not do that. That is okay.
But it was worth a try.
It was worth a try. Yeah.
So Jen, we're getting close to the ending. This has all been so interesting. So I'll just have one more question for you.
Sure.
So this is from Deborah. How strict were you about sticking with facts and known historical details versus taking creative license? Now, you told us a little bit about all your scrupulous research and the quotes that you actually took from the medical documents, etc. What about taking creative license? Like, what were some of those areas?
Even though I love being creative and I love making things up, I also love rules. I'm a real rule follower, and I feel very comfortable with them. And so, to tell you the truth, like, I stuck like glue to the facts, and I stuck like glue to the facts so much that there was a scene there's a miscarriage scene. That might be a trigger for some, I'm sorry. So there is a miscarriage scene in the book, and I wrote it of all the research I'd done on what happens inside of institutions, I wrote it like right and true. And whenever I would get to that scene, I would just feel like sick to my stomach. I just was like, it's such a hard scene. And then every time my editor would get there, and it was, I will say, absolutely historically accurate, but it was devastating and hopeless and awful. And so that I took in that scene, I took a little bit of creative license, and I did something in that scene that I don't know if it would have ever happened in an institution. I didn't read about it happening in an institution, but man, I hoped it did.
Yeah, because we all care for our characters. Yes.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Jen. This has just been marvelous. And I think Michelle is going to join us again. Yes, hello, Michelle.
Yes. Thank you both so much for this and for joining us in the new platform. And thank you, viewers, for those great questions. I do have one more for both of you. What are you currently reading?
Wow. Jen, you go first.
Okay. I am currently reading an arc of Adrian Kistner's next book, which comes out in August, and it's called 6 Angry Girls, and it is fabulously funny, and it's like you just feel such like good righteous anger, but happy righteous anger. So I'm enjoying it so much, and if you can't wait for Adrian's book to come out in August, her last book just won the Environmental Award, and that is the Confusion of Laurel Graham, and so that is an actual book that you can read. But 6 Angry Girls is what I'm reading now.
Oh boy. And I actually just finished an arc for an author that I know Politics and Prose is going to host on May the 8th. And I was so thrilled to get this arc in my hands. The book won't be out until the first week of May, but I am such a fan of Catherine Applegate. And this book is a sequel to The One and Only Ivan. Oh. And it is told from the little dog's point of view. It's the one and only Bob. And I finished it, and then I wanted to go back and read it all over again. I just enjoyed it so much.
Oh, well, that's the best. All right. Thank you both again for joining us. And thank you, viewers, again for joining us tonight. Your support is what's keeping us going, and we hope you'll continue to shop online and attend more digital events like this one. Remember, you can click the green button below to purchase your copy of The Degenerates, and you can click the follow button on your screen to get notifications of other PMP Crowdcast events. It'll ping you just like that sound. And completely planned. And you can check out our website for updated event listings. You can also follow our Children and Teens Department specifically on social media under @KidsInPros. And that's about it for this evening. We hope to see you again soon, and thank you again for joining us.
Thank you so much for having us, and support your indies.
Thank you to Politics and Prose. Thank you, Jen. Thank you to the viewers. Thank you to Politics and Prose behind the scenes that made this happen. We really appreciate it.
Well, thank you both again. Goodbye, everyone.
Bye.